The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the sterile conference room of Meridian Tech Solutions as the quarterly board meeting dragged into its third hour. 27 executives sat around the polished mahogany table, their expensive suits and perfectly styled hair a stark contrast to the tension that filled the air. The company was hemorrhaging money, and everyone knew it. Klaus Weber, the intimidating German CEO who had been brought in 6 months earlier to save the failing tech company, stood at the head of the table reviewing the dismal quarterly reports. His steel-gray eyes scanned the faces of his management team with obvious displeasure. At 55, Klaus was known throughout the industry as a ruthless turnaround specialist who had salvaged dozens of companies across Europe and America. "These numbers are absolutely unacceptable," Klaus said in his heavily accented English, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "We are bleeding cash, our productivity is down 30%, and half of you seem to think this is some kind of social club rather than a business." The executives shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs. Sarah Chen, the head of marketing, stared down at her notes while Tom Bradley, the CFO, loosened his tie nervously. Nobody wanted to be the target of Klaus's legendary temper, which had become the stuff of office legend since his arrival. Outside in the hallway, Miguel Santos pushed his cleaning cart quietly past the conference room. At 62, Miguel had worked as the night janitor at Meridian Tech for almost 8 years. He was the invisible man of the office, arriving after everyone left and departing before most employees arrived in the morning. His weathered hands and humble demeanor made him nearly invisible to the high-powered executives who occasionally passed him in the halls. Miguel had learned to move silently through the offices, emptying trash cans and mopping floors while being careful not to disturb anyone working late. He took pride in his work, ensuring that every surface gleamed and every wastebasket was emptied. The executives barely acknowledged his existence, seeing him as just another piece of office equipment. "We need dramatic changes immediately," Klaus continued, his voice growing louder with frustration. "I have seen kindergartens run with more efficiency than this organization. Half of your departments are redundant, and the other half are incompetent." The tension in the room was palpable. These were successful people who had built careers and commanded 6-figure salaries, and they were being dressed down like children. Klaus paced behind his chair, his perfectly polished shoes clicking against the marble floor as he gestured emphatically. Miguel paused outside the conference room door, which had been left slightly ajar. He could hear Klaus's voice rising with anger, but something about the accent caught his attention. It wasn't just German, it was specifically Bavarian German, the same dialect Miguel had heard decades ago, during a very different time in his life. "The board of directors is breathing down my neck," Klaus continued, switching momentarily to German as his frustration peaked. "Diese verdammten Amerikaner verstehen nicht, was harte Arbeit bedeutet. Sie leben in einer Fantasiewelt, wo sie denken, dass Erfolg ihnen zusteht, ohne dass sie sich davor anstrengen müssen." The executives looked at each other with blank expressions. None of them spoke German, so Klaus's outburst was meaningless to them. They understood he was angry, but the specific words were lost on them. Klaus often switched to his native language when he was particularly frustrated, a habit that made him seem even more intimidating and foreign to his American staff. Miguel froze outside the door, his hands gripping the handle of his mop. The words Klaus had spoken in German were not just angry, they were deeply offensive. Klaus had called the Americans lazy and said they lived in a fantasy world where they thought they deserved success without working for it. But more than that, something about Klaus's voice, his particular accent and intonation, triggered a memory that Miguel had buried for decades. "And furthermore," Klaus continued in English, "I am tired of the excuses. In Germany, we have a saying about people who make excuses instead of results." He paused, searching for the right words to translate his thought. Without thinking, Miguel stepped into the doorway of the conference room. Every head turned toward him in surprise. The sight of the janitor interrupting a board meeting was so unexpected that several executives actually gasped. Miguel still held his mop in one hand, his simple work uniform a stark contrast to the expensive business attire surrounding him. "Entschuldigung, Herr Weber," Miguel said in perfect, fluent German, his voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "Aber ich glaube, Sie irren sich, wenn Sie denken, dass niemand hier Deutsch versteht. Und ich muss sagen, dass Ihre Kommentare über Amerikaner nicht nur respektlos, sondern auch ziemlich heuchlerisch sind, wenn man bedenkt, dass Sie selbst hier sind, um von amerikanischen Investoren bezahlt zu werden." The silence that followed was deafening. Klaus's face went completely white as he stared at Miguel in shock. The executives looked back and forth between the two men, understanding that something significant had just happened but having no idea what. The air in the room seemed to crackle with tension as Klaus struggled to process what he had just heard. Miguel had not only understood every word Klaus had said in German, but had responded with sophisticated, educated German that revealed a level of linguistic skill that went far beyond basic conversation. His accent was precise, his grammar flawless, and his vocabulary suggested someone with extensive education and experience with the language. You speak German," Klaus stammered in English, his usual confidence completely shattered. "Fließend," Miguel replied, which meant fluently. He set down his mop and stood straighter, his entire demeanor changing. "I also speak Italian, French, and Portuguese. And I understand enough about business to know that insulting your employees in a foreign language is not the behavior of a competent leader." The transformation in Miguel was startling. Gone was the humble, invisible janitor who had cleaned their offices for years. In his place stood a man who spoke with authority and intelligence, his eyes sharp and his bearing confident. It was as if he had removed a mask that he had been wearing for nearly a decade. "How do you—" Klaus began, but Miguel cut him off. "How do I speak German?" Miguel asked, switching back to English for the benefit of the confused executives. "I learned it at the University of Sao Paulo, where I earned my doctorate in international business and economics. I spent 5 years working for BMW in Munich before returning to Brazil to run the South American division of a major consulting firm." The room erupted in stunned murmurs. The executives turned to stare at Miguel with new eyes, trying to reconcile the man they thought they knew with this revelation. Sarah Chen's mouth hung open in shock, while Tom Bradley looked like he had seen a ghost. "That's impossible," Klaus said weakly. You're a janitor." Miguel smiled, but there was no humor in it. "I am a janitor because 8 years ago my wife was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. We moved to the United States so she could receive treatment at MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston. I took the first job I could find that provided health insurance and allowed me to work nights so I could be with her during her treatments during the day." The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. These executives, who had barely noticed Miguel's existence for years, were learning that they had been in the presence of someone whose qualifications likely exceeded their own. The man they had unconsciously dismissed as invisible had been listening, understanding, and observing everything with the trained eye of a business expert. "My wife passed away 3 years ago," Miguel continued, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of emotion. "I stayed in this job because it gave me time to process my grief, and because I found it peaceful after the high-stress world of corporate consulting. But I have watched this company for 8 years. Herr Weber, I have seen the decisions made in these conference rooms, and I have read the documents that end up in the trash cans I empty." Klaus sank into his chair, looking utterly defeated. The man he had been berating as incompetent had just revealed himself to be more qualified than most of the people in the room. More than that, Miguel had been a silent witness to 8 years of corporate decisions, privy to conversations and documents that most employees never saw. "What exactly did he say about us?" asked Jennifer Walsh, the head of human resources, looking between Miguel and Klaus. Miguel looked directly at Klaus before answering. "He said that Americans don't understand what hard work means, and that you live in a fantasy world where you think you deserve success without effort. He was venting his frustrations in German because he assumed none of you would understand." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The executives turned to stare at Klaus with expressions ranging from anger to disgust. Being insulted was bad enough, but being insulted in a foreign language by someone who thought he was too superior to be understood was infinitely worse. "That's completely unacceptable," said David Park, the head of product development. "We may have performance issues, but we don't deserve to be insulted behind our backs in a language we don't speak." Klaus tried to salvage the situation. "It was a moment of frustration. I didn't mean to—" "Oh, but you did mean it," Miguel interrupted, "and this wasn't the first time. I've heard you make similar comments in German during previous meetings. You frequently refer to your American colleagues as dies Idioten, these idiots. You've called the board of directors incompetente Narren, incompetent fools. And just last week, you referred to the entire sales team as hoffnungslos Versager, hopeless failures. With each translation, the faces of the executives grew darker. They were learning that their CEO had been systematically insulting them for months, safe in the assumption that his linguistic superiority made him untouchable. The power dynamic in the room had completely shifted, with the supposed inferior revealing the supposed superior to be petty and disrespectful. "Dr. Santos," said Tom Bradley, emphasizing the title, "you said you've been observing this company for 8 years. What's your assessment of our actual problems?" Miguel considered the question carefully. Your problems are not laziness or incompetence. Your problems are structural and strategic. You're trying to compete in markets where you lack competitive advantages, you're pursuing too many initiatives without adequate focus, and your management style, he looked directly at Klaus, creates fear rather than motivation. Employees can't perform their best when they're constantly worried about being humiliated or fired. The executives began nodding as Miguel spoke. His analysis was more insightful than anything they had heard in months of expensive consulting reports. Here was someone who had been watching their operations from a unique vantage point, someone with the credentials to understand what he was seeing and the perspective to observe without bias. Furthermore, Miguel continued, your biggest asset is your existing customer base, but you've been so focused on acquiring new customers that you've neglected retention. I've seen the customer service complaints that end up in the trash, and I've overheard the phone calls from frustrated clients. You're losing loyal customers while spending fortunes trying to attract new ones. Sarah Chen leaned forward eagerly. What would you recommend? Miguel glanced around the room, seeing faces that were now looking at him with respect and genuine interest. First, you need leadership that treats employees as partners rather than obstacles. Second, you need to focus on 3 core competencies instead of trying to be everything to everyone. Third, you need to implement customer retention programs that are at least as sophisticated as your acquisition strategies. Klaus sat in stunned silence as Miguel systematically outlined solutions that were both practical and achievable. Everything the janitor was saying made perfect sense, and it was clear that his recommendations came from years of high-level business experience. The man Klaus had dismissed as insignificant was revealing himself to be exactly the kind of strategic thinker the company desperately needed. Dr. Santos, said Jennifer Walsh, would you be interested in consulting for us? Your insights are exactly what we need. Miguel smiled for the first time since entering the room. I appreciate the offer, but I've actually been considering a return to consulting. My grief has healed enough that I'm ready to engage with the business world again. However, I would not be comfortable working for this company as long as Herr Weber remains as CEO. The statement hung in the air like a challenge. Every executive in the room understood the implication. They had just discovered that their janitor was more qualified than their CEO, and more importantly, that their CEO had been systematically disrespecting them while thinking he was too clever to be caught. Klaus finally found his voice. This is ridiculous. You're all going to listen to the janitor over me? We're going to listen to Dr. Miguel Santos, who has a doctorate in international business and 5 years of executive experience at BMW, Tom Bradley said firmly. And we're going to seriously reconsider whether we want to continue working with someone who insults us in foreign languages. Over the following weeks, the company underwent dramatic changes. Klaus Weber was quietly asked to resign, with the board citing, quote, cultural incompatibility as the reason for his departure. Miguel was offered the interim CEO position, which he accepted on the condition that he could implement comprehensive changes to the company culture and strategic direction. Yakinsexes, the transformation was remarkable. Employee morale improved dramatically when Miguel instituted open communication policies and treated everyone with respect regardless of their position. He restructured the company around its 3 strongest competencies and launched customer retention programs that immediately began showing results. Most importantly, he created an environment where good ideas were valued regardless of their source. Miguel kept his office on the same floor where he used to work as a janitor, and he made a point of learning the names and stories of every employee, from the newest intern to the most senior vice president. He understood that his years of invisibility had taught him something valuable about the importance of seeing and valuing every person in an organization. The night cleaning staff was particularly shocked to discover that their former colleague was now running the company. Miguel made sure they knew that their observations and insights were always welcome, and he instituted regular meetings where facilities staff could share feedback about office operations and employee behavior patterns they noticed during their work. Within 6 months, Meridian Tech had returned to profitability for the first time in over 2 years. The turnaround was featured in several business publications, with many articles highlighting the unusual story of the janitor who became CEO. Miguel gave interviews about the importance of not making assumptions about people based on their current circumstances, and about the value of truly listening to everyone in an organization. The conference room where everything had changed was renovated and renamed the Hidden Potential Room, with a plaque that read, "Great insights can come from unexpected sources." Miguel insisted on keeping his old cleaning cart in his office as a reminder of the lessons he had learned during his years of invisible observation. Klaus Weber found work with another company, but his reputation for linguistic arrogance followed him. The story of the German CEO who was outsmarted by his own janitor became a cautionary tale in business schools about the dangers of assumption and disrespect. Meanwhile, Miguel built Meridian Tech into one of the most respected companies in the industry, known for its innovative culture and exceptional employee satisfaction. Years later, when asked about that pivotal moment in the conference room, Miguel would always say that Klaus had actually done him a favor. "Sometimes it takes someone else's prejudice and arrogance to reveal our own hidden strength," he would explain. Klaus thought he was superior because he could speak a language others couldn't understand. But he forgot that communication is about more than just words. It's about respect, empathy, and the wisdom to recognize that everyone has something valuable to contribute. The story became a legend within the company and beyond, a reminder that brilliance and wisdom can be found in the most unexpected places, and that the person you overlook today might be the one who could change your life tomorrow. 2 years into Miguel's tenure as CEO, Meridian Tech faced its biggest challenge yet. A major competitor, Titan Industries, was attempting a hostile takeover, claiming that the company was being run by, quote, unqualified leadership and needed real business expertise to reach its potential. The irony wasn't lost on Miguel, who had heard similar dismissive language before. The takeover bid gained momentum when several business publications questioned Miguel's unconventional rise to leadership. From Janitor to CEO, Inspiring Story or Corporate Mistake, read one particularly harsh headline. The financial press was skeptical that someone who had spent 8 years cleaning offices could truly understand the complexities of running a major corporation. During a tense emergency board meeting, board member Patricia Williams voiced the concerns that many were thinking. "Miguel, we all admire your story, but the market is questioning our credibility. Titan's stock price has surged while ours has remained flat despite our operational improvements. Maybe we need to consider their offer." Miguel sat quietly at the head of the table, the same table where Klaus had once berated the executives in German. He had learned over the years that sometimes the most powerful response was silence, allowing others to reveal their true thoughts before speaking. "The optics are challenging," admitted board member Robert Chen. Titan's CEO, Jonathan Blackwood, has an MBA from Wharton and 20 years of Fortune 500 experience. The investment community sees him as a safer bet than, he paused uncomfortably. "Than the former janitor?" Miguel finished with a slight smile. "Please, speak freely." "I've heard worse." The room fell silent. These board members had watched Miguel transform the company, had seen employee satisfaction scores reach all-time highs, and had witnessed the steady return to profitability. But they were also pragmatic business people who understood that perception often mattered as much as reality in the corporate world. "There's something else," said Tom Bradley, who had remained as CFO and become one of Miguel's strongest supporters. "I've been doing some research on Jonathan Blackwood and Titan Industries. Their employee turnover rate is over 40% annually, and they've had 3 major discrimination lawsuits in the past 5 years. Their growth has come primarily through aggressive cost-cutting and mass layoffs." Miguel nodded thoughtfully. "And what does our employee turnover look like now?" "Less than 8%, Tom replied, "the lowest in our industry." "Customer satisfaction scores?" "Highest we've ever recorded," added Sarah Chen, who had flourished under Miguel's leadership and been promoted to Chief Marketing Officer. Miguel stood and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where he used to arrive each night with his cleaning supplies. "I understand your concerns about perception," he said. "But I learned something important during my years of being invisible in this company. The most dangerous decisions are the ones made based on appearances rather than substance." He turned back to face the board. "Titan wants to acquire us not because we're failing, but because we're succeeding in ways that threaten their business model. They build profit through fear and exploitation. We build profit through respect and empowerment. Those are two fundamentally different approaches to business. Patricia Williams shifted in her seat. But Miguel, the financial analysts are saying, "The financial analysts said we would be bankrupt within a year when I took over," Miguel interrupted gently. "They said a company couldn't be profitable while treating employees well. They said customer loyalty was less important than quarterly earnings." How did those predictions work out? The board members exchanged glances. They all remembered the dire forecasts that had accompanied Miguel's appointment as CEO. Every traditional business metric had suggested the company was doomed, yet here they were, stronger than they had been in years. "I have a proposal," Miguel continued. "Give me 3 months to respond to this takeover attempt, not with lawyers or financial maneuvering, but by demonstrating what this company has become. Let our employees, our customers, and our results speak for themselves." Over the next 3 months, Miguel orchestrated a campaign unlike anything the business world had seen before. Instead of hiring expensive PR firms or staging traditional corporate events, he opened the company's doors to unprecedented transparency. He invited journalists, analysts, and investors to spend time with employees at every level, from the newest hires to the senior management team. The results were remarkable. Business publications that had initially dismissed Miguel began writing stories about the company's unique culture. The Janitor CEO who revolutionized corporate leadership became a Harvard Business Review cover story. From invisible to visionary, how one man changed everything appeared in Forbes. But the real breakthrough came when Maria Gonzalez, a machine operator who had worked at the company for 15 years, was interviewed by CNBC. "Before Dr. Santos became CEO, I was just a number," she said on live television. "Management didn't know my name, didn't care about my ideas, and certainly didn't ask for my input on how to improve operations. Now my suggestions have been implemented in 3 different departments, and I'm enrolled in the company-sponsored engineering program. This isn't just a job anymore, it's a career." The interview went viral, shared millions of times across social media platforms. Other employees began speaking publicly about their experiences, creating an organic groundswell of support that no amount of corporate messaging could have manufactured. #Janitor CEO began trending on Twitter, but instead of mockery, the hashtag was filled with stories of transformation and empowerment. Jonathan Blackwood, CEO of Titan Industries, found himself increasingly on the defensive. During a televised debate with Miguel, he made the mistake of dismissing his opponent's qualifications. "My MBA from Wharton and my 20 years of executive experience speak for themselves," Blackwood said condescendingly. "Some stories are inspiring, but running a corporation requires real credentials." Miguel's response was measured and devastating. "Mr. Blackwood, I notice you mention your MBA often, but you rarely mention your company's 40% annual turnover rate. You talk about your executive experience, but you don't discuss the 3 discrimination lawsuits your company has faced. You speak about credentials, but you remain silent about the fact that Titan's employee satisfaction scores rank in the bottom 10% of your industry." The moderator pressed Blackwood on these points, and his responses revealed a leader who saw employees as expendable resources rather than valuable partners. In contrast, Miguel spoke passionately about the untapped potential in every organization, about the innovations that come from listening to people at every level, and about the sustainable competitive advantage that comes from building a culture of respect and empowerment. The turning point came when Klaus Weber, Miguel's former boss, published an open letter in the Wall Street Journal. In it, he admitted his mistakes and offered a powerful endorsement of Miguel's leadership. "I came to Meridian Tech believing that authority came from intimidation, and that intelligence was demonstrated through superiority," Klaus wrote. "Miguel Santos taught me that true leadership comes from humility, and that wisdom often emerges from the most unexpected places. I was wrong about him, and I was wrong about what makes a company successful." The letter was a bombshell. Here was the man who had initially dismissed Miguel, publicly acknowledging his own failings and endorsing the leadership of someone he had once seen as beneath his notice. Klaus revealed that he had been following Meridian Tech's progress from afar and had been impressed by the company's transformation. Within days of the letter's publication, Titan Industries withdrew their takeover bid, citing, quote, "changed market conditions." But everyone knew the real reason. They had underestimated the power of authentic leadership and the loyalty it could inspire. Miguel's response to a reporter asking about his vindication was characteristically humble. "I never needed Klaus's approval to know my worth, but I'm grateful he learned something about recognizing the potential in others." The janitor, who had once been invisible, had become a symbol of hidden potential everywhere. And in conference rooms around the world, executives began to wonder what wisdom they might be overlooking in the people they passed by every day without truly seeing. The end.